Welcome back to American DA Live. I'm Alexandra Harper. On April 28, 2011, Officer Brian Derman was struck and killed by Glenn Donahue at the intersection of Limestone and Alabama Street. Officer Derman was investigating a noise violation at 10 p.m. that evening. On June 30, 2011, Donahue, the person who struck Officer Derman, was convicted of second-degree manslaughter and numerous other charges in connection with Officer Derman's death. Donahue was sentenced to 20 years in prison. On today's show, host Jack Patty, Ray the DA, Victim Services Director Mary Houlihan, and Brian Derman's wife, Brandy Derman, will discuss the memories she shared with her husband along with her being a victim during this.
The last time that Brandy saw him and when she got the word of the incident.
Okay, Brandy, let's talk a little bit about that. So, when he's on duty, does the spouse worry?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So, and you always hope he comes home every night, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And he didn't on the night of April the 29th or the 30th of April. He didn't come home.
No, sir.
So, how did you learn that he'd had somebody had hit him, or that he was involved in the crash?
One of Brian's friends, who is also a police officer in Central Sector, was on the phone with his fiance, and he got to the scene. He said, "Oh my gosh, Brian's been in an accident," and he turned off his phone. He ended the call with her. She called me and said, "I think Brian's been in a car accident. You might want to call and check on him." So I called him. He didn't answer, which that's not really any different than any other night. He is there to do a job, and I knew that. And if he was out on a call or something like that, he would call me as soon as he could to let me know that he was okay. I began to become panicked because I tried to call other people because, as you said, it was a family. I tried to call the other guys that I knew were working with him that night, and none of them would answer. So I started to get panicked. I went to my neighbor's house. I had already put Braden to bed, and I went to see my neighbor to see if they would watch Braden while I went to Central Sector to check on him to see what had happened. And when I was knocking on her door, I looked up the street, and there were 3 police cars coming down the street with their lights on. So I knew it was bad. The only other time I'd ever heard about that happening was when there was an officer that had been shot. So I panicked even more.
Mm-hmm. So, what happened?
I ran out on the sidewalk and flagged the officers down, and they proceeded to tell me that Brian had been hit by a car, and they didn't know how he was doing and that I needed to come with them right away. I said, "Well, I can't, I've got to find care for Braden," and they said, "Well, we'll take him with us," and I'm so glad that I didn't. I'm so thankful that I had my head on straight that night and I didn't take him to the hospital with me, because those are images I will never get out of my head. And I went back to my house, and there he was standing in the front door holding his stuffed puppy. And he thought I was in trouble and that the police were coming to take me to timeout. So I took him next door, and my neighbors took him, and Brian's best friend took me to the hospital running lights and sirens. And I asked him, I said, "John, how bad is it?" And he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said he wasn't breathing when I left the scene. And I prayed the whole way to the hospital that he would be okay, because I knew he was strong, I knew he was a fighter, and if he could fight for his life, he would. But he never got that chance.
So you got to the hospital, and because I can remember coming and meeting you for the first time at the hospital, and it's very interesting. We've dealt with survivors of homicide victims a lot over the years, and most people are kind of afraid to come up and just impose, or basically come up and say, "Hello, I'm so-and-so, and I'm sorry." They just stand back and so forth. But my job is to come and tell you that I'm there, introduce myself because I knew at that point that you and I probably going to get to know each other over the next several months. And did that, got your phone number. I think it was from was it your brother that gave
Yes.
me your phone number? So that I could give to Mary, who runs our victim services. So Mary, what happens? I give you the phone number after I've gone and talked to Brandy.
Well, for me coming into work the next morning, my husband also is a Lexington police officer, and so I began to hear some of what was going on overnight. But when I got to work the next morning, you gave me that number. I wasn't going to call at that moment because, understandably, knowing that the family is trying to make some decisions and that they, as long as they knew that they can get a hold of us, I was going to give them that time. But then I was contacted by the police that were going to go out and meet with Brandy, and would I come with them just because I am trained in handling victim issues and difficult situations like that. So I went out with the police, and there was a large police presence, and by that time there was a lot of family present. This is less than 24 hours later, and the thing that strikes me and has struck me since I very first met Brandy that day was her poise, her ability to ask question after question and keep it together. And I didn't know about her history in dealing with people in similar situations, which I'm sure benefited her at that time. But it was still remarkable. I think she and Brian had one of those relationships where they talked about work and about their interests enough that she just had a remarkable head on her shoulders. But it was obviously an incredibly difficult time because she wasn't only dealing with her loss, but the loss for the rest of the family that was suddenly all around her and wanting answers too.
To learn more, click below or tune in every Friday morning at 9 a.m. on News Talk 590.